Bearding Way Media.
Welcome to episode 78 of the Filmumentaries podcast. This is Jamie Benning, talking to you here from my little office here at home in southeast London. It's June 2023. It doesn't look like it outside, but it is summer. This is the first episode of the month, and this is another very special episode with a very special man. More of that in just a moment. If this is the first time you've listened to the podcast, welcome. You have about an hour or so of film history chat ahead of you. Please do check out some or all of the previous 77 episodes. They're all great as far as I'm concerned. If you love behind the scenes chat, and each of them gives you an insight into the film industry and the different roles within it. I've spoken to directors, writers, editors, VFX and special effects artists, sound designers, behind the scenes documentarians, composers. There are lots to choose from, and there's always a lot to learn. If you're a regular listener, thanks as always for your continued support. If any of you like my work, and this is work, albeit work that I love, then please visit patreon.com/Jamie Benning. There are several tiers to choose from with different perks and merch too. Thanks to those that are already supporting the podcast. I think there's about 100 of you doing so now. And talking of merch, you can also support the podcast by buying some Filmumentaries goodies, including mugs, t-shirts, bags, bottles, and even socks. There's t-shirts as well with designs from my friend Pete Starling for my Inside Jabber and Inside Jaws posters on them. You could buy one for your next film convention. There's a few coming up here in London in the summer. Please check out that shop at filmumentaries.creator-spring.com. I'll put it in the show notes because that's just too long, along with the Patreon link as well. I'm going to be adding a few more designs there in the coming weeks, so watch this or that space. So for this episode, number 78, I spoke to composer Stu Phillips. Stu was born in 1929. He's an American composer of film scores and television series theme tunes. He's also a conductor and a record producer, though he's probably best known for composing the themes to the television series Battlestar Galactica, the original one, and Knight Rider. After a career spanning decades, in 2002, Stu published his autobiography, Stu Who, or Stu, as you would say in America, 40 years of navigating the minefields of the music business. I'll post the link to that as well. It's definitely a good read and worth checking out. Stu and I had arranged to chat for months. We had so many different times when we had to cancel. I was unwell at one point, then had some internet problems, then his phone line was down for a few weeks. But we finally managed to do it in May this year, 2023, if you're listening in the future. I have to say, it was a genuine pleasure chatting to Stu, and as you'll hear, he's as sharp as a tack at 93 years old. Definitely the oldest guest I've had on the podcast, but wow, honestly, he was fantastic. His recall was incredible, and the conversation just flowed really, really nicely. At one point in the conversation, Stu and I had to talk about how artists borrow from each other all the time. Hang around at the end of this episode to hear what I found out after a deep dive into one particular track of Stu's. Little caveat here, as with my conversation with Peter Kuran in episode 75, I was having internet problems at the time. So there are a couple of dropouts. Some I've managed to edit around, others I haven't. So if you hear any little jumps in the conversation, that's why. Hopefully it won't be too jarring. There are a few clicks and noises initially in the call. I'm not sure what was happening there. It was a phone line I was calling and speaking to Stu on. He doesn't have Zoom or anything like that. So it does sound a little bit different to usual, but honestly, this is well worth listening to. So here's my chat with composer Stu Phillips, and I'll be back at the end for a bit more jabbering on. Stu, what inspired you to become a TV and film composer? Where did it begin? When did you first fall in love with the idea of composing?
When I had a when I was an A&R man at a Colpix Records, and they didn't want to. I had a hit record, and they didn't want me. They didn't want to pay one of my friends out here in California. I was in New York then. Knew that I had some kind of an interest, and I loved film music. I never said I wanted to write it, but he knew I liked it. So they offered me a three-picture deal to write the music for the 3 Columbia pictures. And instead of giving me this advance that I was looking for, and I don't know, I just kind of like a sort of a whim, I said, no, well, why not? I'll try it. I'll do anything. And so I did. And that's how it started. Yeah, I'd always had a fascination for when I was a kid and went to the movies, in my teens and stuff. I used to like pirate movies and stuff like that. And I always loved the music, the big swashbuckling music that went with the pictures. And but I never, felt I wanted to do that. I did go to Eastman School of Music and studied composition there, but that wasn't my main interest. My main interest was being an arranger and other parts, but not being a film and TV composer. But that changed my mind back in 1962.
And were there composers that you admired back then when you watched those swashbuckling pirate movies? Were there composers that kind of, caught your interest?
All the people who did them, Eric Wolfgang Korngold and Max Steiner, and I guess I'm going to leave out some people I don't want to leave out, but at least those two, that I can remember offhand. And my first movie actually had nothing to do with those 3 pictures that Columbia offered me. It was something that once I'd signed that deal, somebody came into my office and had an independent movie, and they needed some music for it. And since I knew I was going to be writing some stuff eventually in Hollywood, I did this movie, and that was really my first feature film, and it was a picture called Mad Dog Cole. It was a gangster movie, and that was my first one, which had nothing to do with the contracts that I had with Columbia. But it happened to come out on Columbia Pictures. They bought the independent film and put it out. Just a coincidence.
Oh, and when you're looking at scoring for a gangster movie, are you revisiting gangster movies that you'd already seen and the popular movies that were around at the time for inspiration, or are you the sort of composer that kind of likes to start with the equivalent of a blank canvas?
It depends. I've done them all ways. Every conceivable. This particular gangster movie was a period movie. Mad Dog Cole was like in the 1930s and stuff, so it was pretty, it was actually a jazzy score, 1930s jazzy score. So, each picture that I do, has a different way of approaching it. Sometimes I work backwards, sometimes I work forwards, sometimes I work off a theme, sometimes the theme develops off of what I'm working on. There is no one particular way that I have done all these things through television and film and everything.
You can find inspiration in lots of different places, I would imagine, whether it just comes to mind or...
You know what? If inspiration doesn't come from the movie, you're in a lot of trouble. If you're not inspired by the movie, and let me tell you, there's plenty of things that I've done that I wasn't quite inspired, and I'd close my eyes at home and I'd imagine a much better movie than it really was, and I'd write music, from my imagination rather than from the actual what was on the footage, you know.
Yeah, sure. And in those early movies that you did, would you kind of get the final cut and then you'd begin working on the music, or were you engaged earlier on?
Well, the first three movies I did with Columbia were very professional. The movies were always final cuts with maybe occasional a little edit here and there after it. But once I got out of that and got into television and got into independent movies, it got a lot different. People would what they showed you as supposedly a final cut was far from it, and you'd be cutting the picture while you're writing the music,
Right.
and you'd constantly have to rewrite the music because you'd get new cue sheets and timing sheets. And everything would be different than what you wrote your music to, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You as well.
But the first
Go ahead.
were very professional. It was a finished cut, and that was it.
Mm. You, in reading about you, I realised that you're one of the earliest people to use synthesizers on a film score. How did that come about? Is it just because you're the sort of person that was always interested in the technological side of things, what was possible, the new incoming technologies, or was that an accident that you fell into using synthesizers?
No, I tried to keep up with the times. You know, composers. My first real use of the synthesizer was in a movie in 1968 called "The Name of the Game Is Kill," and I used the Moog synthesizer. But it was the Moog synthesizer that was at that particular time like approximately 8 feet tall and 10 feet wide, with a whole bunch of cables and knobs and stuff, and all it did was emit, you know, a bunch of waves and things that you fooled with. But you know, other people before me, Jerry Goldsmith, and I think of you know a few that. They used what the early, you know, synthesizers that were around, and I didn't do much with them, but that was my first big use of one. And then I started to just keep up with the times and use them here and there, and until I did Knight Rider, and then I went big time with with a lot of synthesizers, and you know, by that time people were starting to use them quite a bit, you know.
Yeah, but it sounds like you were there kind of, you know,
I was
at
kind
the
of there
beginning.
in the opening innings. Yeah, I was there in the opening innings. I experimented with things. I had a friend, a couple of friends. There was a thing called the Blaster Beam, and who owned that. That was a kind of a synthesized instrument that I used in Spider-Man, the TV version of Spider-Man. Yeah, but that was in the late 70s, so it had been used once or twice before, but I had never heard it. And I was looking for a sound, and I called this friend. I said, "What do you got in your little garage there?" And he said, "Oh, I got this Blaster Beam." I said, "What is that?" And I went down there, listened to it, and he said, a couple of composers have used it already. I said, "I don't care. It works for me in this particular episode." And so I used it. So I would experiment. I would try to keep up. Yeah, until I got to the point that I hated synthesizers, you know.
In the 70s, like what was it, about 74, you were with Universal Television. Was that a staff position where you were given scores to work on, you know, from their catalog of shows?
No staff position. Glenn Lawson, who was a singer in a group called the Four Preps, and he was at Capitol Records in 1963. He in the group, and I was their record producer. I was an A&R man at Capitol Records, and I produced his his last record actually, and then 10 years later he was a big time Hollywood composer for a pilot that he was doing called The $6 Million Man,
Mm-hmm.
and it was the third pilot already. They already had 2 pilots that didn't sell, and so he was doing it. And he, out of 10 years, I hadn't seen him in 10 years, and had been his producer. Now suddenly he said, he said you were recommended by the music editor downstairs at Universal, said that he worked with you in a movie and that you were good. And he said, "Are you interested?" And I said, "Yes." And so that's a 14-year relationship with Glenn Lawson, where I worked for him for about 14 years.
Mm. And writing that iconic theme for Battlestar Galactica, which is one that I can hum ever since I mean, I was born in '76, so I don't really remember a time when that show didn't exist.
Yeah, well, you were 6 years old when that came out.
Yeah, but when you were writing that, of course, Battlestar Galactica was very much riding that wave of the success of Star Wars, kind of Star Wars fever in a way. Did you feel any pressure, given the success of the film and the success of John Williams' score, to kind of reproduce that, or were you given freedom to come up with something that was very much your own?
Well, I was given freedom, but the point was I'm writing, music to a film that's pretty close to what Star Wars was. So it was the Glenn wanted a symphonic score like Star Wars. So given that assignment, it was pretty difficult to try to stay away. Fortunately, I was a friend of John Williams at that time. We had worked together in the early 1960s on some stuff, and so we were, I wouldn't say we were close friends, but we were friends. We knew each other, and so I did the best I could to not get even close to what he did and not do a march, which more like what his was, and mine is more this kind of certainly not a march. And there was a little I wouldn't say friction, but when I recorded, and with all the strange things in the world, I recorded at 20th Century Fox, of all places, 5 days, and John Williams' close friend is Lionel Newman, and I looked up one day from the podium and looked in the booth, and there was John Williams sitting there with, Lionel Newman for about 30 minutes and listening to what I was doing.
Oh, wow.
And then he left, and gave me a wave, and he left. And years later, John told me that Fox had asked him to come into the studio to see if I was lifting any of his music for the Battlestar, and he had said to them, no, he says he's writing his own thing. He says, and John's that kind of guy that even if I was lifting, he wouldn't have said anything. He's not the kind of person, because John does his own lifting between you and me.
Yeah, of course. I mean, all you have to do is listen to things by Korngold, and you recognize it. And
I'm talking about a good friend and somebody I respect highly, is one of the best that ever lived in the business. But the point is that we all do that. We can't help it. There's no way to get around it.
Good artists borrow, great artists steal, I think is the saying, or something like that. What kind of notes did... Go on.
Sorry. That was 1978, and in 1982, John decided to do a sci-fi concert with the Boston Pops, and contacted me and said he wanted to do Battlestar Galactica.
Oh, great.
So, obviously, and he recorded it, too.
Nice.
There's, that was, but yes, there was a little pressure, around it, and but all in all, I don't think I really stole any of John's stuff, or.
No, agreed. Agreed.
They
very much stand alone.
I wasn't that aware of that much of the music to begin with. I had seen it at a screening, and that was it. So, I had only had one experience with watching the movie. So it was not like I was sitting there every day with the soundtrack listening to it.
Yeah,
So
sure.
yeah, I mean the theme was so iconic. I mean, that was hard to get away from. And as I said, if anything I was going to do wasn't going to be a march.
Yeah, yeah. And you said earlier about some of those movies that you did early on where you'd get the final cut a lot of the time. With Battlestar Galactica, had you been brought on earlier to kind of shape the feel of the movie and the TV series? Had you seen like early effect shots or some of the dailies or even the Ralph McQuarrie artwork?
I got a script with the artwork in the script, which is very rare now. It's a kind of a collector's item. But I was not that involved on a daily basis with anything. Glenn would occasionally talk about some scenes or something. And the original cut of Galactica was almost 3 hours. So there was a lot of messing around with that show because they had to get it done for American TV. They had to get it done for Canadian TV, which was a little different. Then they had to get it ready for a feature after it ran. It was a messy thing. There were a lot of versions of the and times of the film that went around, and what I got as a final cut was far from it. I mean, I was on the stage with the Los Angeles Philharmonic at 20th Century Fox recording stuff, scenes that my music editor was telling me he was getting new pages of edits that were taking place on the cue that I'm actually recording.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it was a pretty bloody mess, and it would have been much easier if it was a studio orchestra because they're used to that, the studio musicians. But this was the L.A. Philharmonic, and they weren't used to. Okay, guys, wait a minute, we got to change this. Stars 4 to 8 now go in the front. They go 1 to 4, and then you skipped over to they were not happy with that.
Yeah. So it sounds like you really had to improvise and think on your feet during that recording.
Oh, yeah. There were quite a few cues like that. I wouldn't say all of them, but there were quite a few like that. We had to improvise on our feet and on the stage and everything else.
Yeah. And another theme of yours I always think about, and another show that I watched and loved as a kid, was the Buck Rogers in the 25th Century.
Yeah.
Now, there were a couple of versions of that, weren't there? There was the instrumental and there was the vocal version. Tell me about how those two versions
nothing
came
to do
about.
with nothing whatsoever to do with that song. I had to do with it. I did not write it.
Right.
And I take no credit for it. And yes, there was a vocal done. Did a instrumental version of it. And I don't know why, I can't really answer the question, but I was kind of locked out of that whole main title experience on Buck Rogers. And all I can tell you is that a lot of the Buck Rogers score was a redo. I had to redo stuff that the network said that, this is not interesting, we don't like the score. And at that time, I was basing the score on the theme that Glenn Lawson had written.
Right.
And so I had to go in and rescore a whole bunch of scenes, and I wrote a whole new theme for those scenes, But the songs, I think it's called Suspension. That you, me, or what? That beep?
No, I just heard a click at my end, so I don't know. It might have been a beep at your end.
Okay, yeah. Anyway, I had nothing to do with that, so I can't help you there.
Yeah, interesting to know.
I can't answer the question as to why, after all the shows that I had done, including Battlestar Galactica, which was successfully, it had a successful season. It's just there was a whole bunch of confusion between the networks and Glenn and studios and everything else, and they decided to go another way with Galactica 1980, which was there. And so I can't answer your question as to why he suddenly decided that on Buck Rogers he was doing this theme himself, and then it didn't work in the show, so I had to go write a new theme, which I used for most of the score. And I think I used I used his theme once or at the end or something, a couple times. Yeah.
I'm of course a kid of the 80s, and I don't know how old I was when Knight Rider came out, but that is another theme that is so memorable.
Well, that was 82, and if you were born in 76, you were 6 years old.
Yeah.
Then, right?
So, and that is so much part of that show, that theme. I can't separate the two. How do you go about writing a theme that has lasted for so long and has been sampled left, right, and center?
It's funny. It came out, and it was really, nobody paid any attention to it. It didn't win any awards, nothing like that. And it went into obscurity until one of the rap artists,
Busta Rhymes.
Yeah, Busta Rhymes and the something land, Google, I can't think of the name, decided to use it for some kind of underneath their rap stuff, and all of a sudden it became like a whole new thing, and it became like everybody's favorite theme on television, and then the ringtones started, and I won an award from BMI for the over 1 million ringtones in the first 6 months, a year. I don't mean.
Wow.
Yeah. In fact, it was a shared award between Lalo Schifrin for Mission Impossible and Knight Rider.
Wow.
So it suddenly had a rebirth thanks to all the rap artists, and he wasn't the only one. It went on, Timbaland and Magoo. So it suddenly bore a whole new life in the last 25 years. It's suddenly become the theme where it goes.
Sorry, you just cut out in the last second there. You were just saying, if you wouldn't mind just repeating. Yeah, sorry.
Hello?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you.
Oh, good. Yeah, you just cut out on the last bit. You were just saying, I think that, it had this whole new lease of life.
Various things that happen to things during the course of a lifetime.
Yeah. But I think you're doing yourself a little injustice there. I think, as even at the time, that theme tune was very popular. And, the question really is about how do you go about defining. I mean, that defines that show. It's the first thing we hear. It's married with those pictures of the car and the red lights on the front of the car and the very serious voiceover. Your themes are very good at feeling like they completely belong with the visuals. I mean, that's your job, right? But how do you even begin to do that?
In that particular case, it was a partnership between the people who were creating the actual film for the main titles and the music. In other words, I kind of recorded the music before I'd seen anything of the main titles.
Really?
And then they ran some stuff, and then they recut stuff, and they put stuff in to match the music. So it was kind of a good partnership between the visual and the music. I didn't just slop the music onto the picture. I had some idea what some of the visuals were when I wrote it, but I had no timings, you know what I mean? And they cut the picture then to work with my timings.
Nice.
Nice. Some of the things that I did that, where the thing swoops up and goes, and gets up there. So they cut the stuff to match, and that's why it, as you say, it looks like a good marriage between music and visuals. It was, we worked together on it. It It was a good partnership.
Yeah, it really does show. I just think that sort of bass line that comes in, and then you say that rising sound and all of that. Where do you start with the working on the piano to do something like that? Where do you begin with a theme like that?
My head, my head. Yeah, I don't write things on the piano or on the guitar or anything else. If it comes out of my head, if it doesn't come out, any lecture I've ever done to any composition classes or anything, I said, if you're sitting at a piano or you're sitting with your guitar and you're writing it, you're not really composing. You're kind of like improvising, because your fingers go places that your mind isn't. I said, if you're really composing music, sit there and think about it and compose it in your head and then write it down, or then play it, or write it down, whatever you'd want to do. Yeah, so I can honestly say to you, no, I didn't write. I happened to be sitting at a piano when I would do that, but I wasn't, composing with the piano. I would write things down and everything. I was a, pencil pusher. I wrote notes and used 25,000 erasers, through my career. And, like anybody, like John or Williams or any one of the composers, eventually, if you happen to be a pianist, you play some of the things you wrote, get a feeling of it. But if it doesn't come from your head, you're really not composing anything. You're just kind of, improvising, and if it sounds good. And all I can say is that 90% of all the scores now are probably written that way, improvising, and if not improvising, simply taking stuff that sits in a computer under, pull down menu number 2, and, down 7 spots, and now, okay, we'll use that for that spot and this for that spot. It's kind of gotten, I'm a little blasé about the, film composing nowadays. In fact, to tell you the truth, the only really, really good film scores I've heard lately are on some of the Netflix stuff that's done overseas in Spain and Germany and stuff. Man, we've watched a couple of shows that were really wonderful scores. And there's a few. I'm not going to condemn everything. There's a few decent, a few stuff here and there, but. A lot of the stuff is just. I'm sorry, I'm not with it. I don't have to. I don't have to be with it. I'm 93 years old, so I don't need to prove anything anymore.
Yeah, well, that's true. I mean, your work talks for itself. I think sometimes, I've spoken to artists who talk about using the computer to draw things or to animate things, and other artists who come from an era where the biggest challenge was having a pencil and a blank piece of paper and just letting something flow out of you. And I think sometimes the tools that we have today can get in the way of that kind of most sort of raw invention, if you know what I mean. Just that's something that. So were you using your voice when you're sitting at the desk there, or you got your pencil and paper? Were you using your voice to hum things out and tap things out?
Sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sometimes I'd hum things. Sometimes I sing things. Sometimes I just think of it and write. And sometimes you write something, and then when you see it on the paper, you suddenly see what you want to go with it. You see it on the paper, and then, wow, this goes here, and this goes there, and then suddenly it all works out,
Yeah.
But those were the old days. Yeah, that's no more like that anymore, which kind of I'm sorry about, because there was all these wonderful composers through the years that, they worked like, composers. Some of them would write pretty much the same. Some wonderful composers, but they got known for their style, and they would constantly keep writing the same thing. But hey, I don't blame them. Gotta make a living, you know.
Yeah, well, I was going to say to ask you about that because, you're not somebody who strikes me as having a particular definable style. You've got very different genres that you've worked in, very different styles. Do you think that's what kept you in work, that people could come to you and find something different?
It certainly kept me interested because I was, married to doing. Somebody said, "Well, get him because he writes this stuff." I without condemning people who I admire greatly, but like somebody like Miklos Rozsa, you can pretty much listen to any score of his and know it's his score, because he relied on certain harmonic progressions and certain melodic skips and everything that was successful. And people said, "I love it." So they rehired him. And when they rehired him, they didn't want to hear something different. They wanted to hear what he wrote. And so, somebody like that became so identifiable that, suddenly he wasn't creating, any longer. He was sort of like copying himself,
Yeah, mimicking himself. Yeah. So how do you maintain that balance between the sort of commercial and creative aspects of your work?
Well, it depends on who hires you and what they ask you for. There's a story about one very famous composer who came in. He was hired to compose the music, and they called him in to look at the first cut of the film so that he could get familiar with it and okay the fact that he was going to do it. He was a very big composer, and he looked at it and he got done, and the director said, "Now what we want on this picture is something like a Lalo Schifrin score." And he said to him, "Then why the hell don't you hire Lalo?" That was the days when, if you were a big enough composer, you could afford to lose a picture and not, lose your career. You try that nowadays, and you'll be out of work for a long time. Yeah, I won't mention the composer that walked out, though.
No, I understand. Whether it's about the process or the outcome of your work, is there a favorite composition of yours? Not necessarily, the final result, but maybe the process in creating it? Because I'm aware that, looking from the outside in, we forget that you're working, day in, day out, making these scores. And sometimes the process of doing it can be just as valuable as the outcome. Is there a particular one that stands out?
There's a couple. Actually, the very first picture I did for Columbia on that particular contractual deal was a picture called "A Man from the Diners Club," starring Danny Kaye. And in case you're too young to know, the Diners Club was like American Express or Visa or
yeah.
It was the very first credit card company that and Hilton were the very credit cards that were ever used. And they made a movie with Danny Kaye called "The Man from the Diners Club." It was a comedy. It was a Danny Kaye comedy. And that was my first movie for Columbia. And when I look back, that was in 1963, I think. When I look back all these years at all the stuff that I've done and everything else, I'm very proud of what I did on my first really major movie. And I didn't know that much about it. I didn't even know what a click track was. I didn't know what streamers were. The music editor had to teach me all that stuff. I had no idea pretty much no idea what I was doing. I did it all from my bootstraps, and I learned while I was writing that picture how to compose music for film. And when I look back and listen to it, I say, Jesus, that's pretty much one of the best scores I ever wrote, So, yeah, that one, and another picture called It's called Follow Me. I think it has a new name now. They keep renaming these old movies to give them more exciting titles or something. It was a surfing movie, and it was a quasi-documentary. It was like a semi-documentary about three surfers who go around the world surfing different famous beaches, around the world in Portugal and Morocco and India, etc. And I really enjoyed that one. Every place they went, the to me, very happy if you tried to capture the music of that particular locale in the score. So every place they went was a whole different approach to what I was writing. A whole different thing. I mean, going from India to Hong Kong, going from Hawaii, So everyone was kind of like a different type of music. And so I enjoyed that one very much, and I'm really happy with that score. The only thing that score ever got was it won an award for best album cover.
Oh yeah.
And it's in a book of album covers, and it won an award. Won some particular I forgot what year that was. 1969, 70. Won an award. The LP. Music didn't, but album covers.
Are awards important to you? Do you like what does it feel like to win an award, or indeed not win an award when you're up against one of your contemporaries?
Like a loser. The only award, as I said, the only award I've ever won was the one for best ringtone for Knight Rider.
Which seems
otherwise,
bizarre.
all my other awards were in the record business. 3 times, 3 nominations for Grammys. I lost them all. And 4 actually, because Battlestar Galactica was nominated for a Grammy for Best Instrumental, recording, and I lost, I think, to Henry Mancini, which isn't bad.
I mean, yeah, you're up there.
Pretty big, yeah.
Yeah.
So I can honestly say that I've lost every nomination that I've ever been nominated for. And unfortunately, or I can't say unfortunately, but unnecessarily, Battlestar Galactica never got nominated. And everybody at Columbia said it was a shoo-in for not only a nomination, but for a win, because nobody had ever had a philharmonic, a symphony orchestra on a television soundtrack,
Yeah, true, yeah.
And just the simple fact that the Los Angeles Philharmonic was playing the music on the pilot episode of Battlestar Galactica was enough. And unfortunately, a technicality arose, which is kind of stuck me in the back for years and years and years and years in the backside. And it was a stupid technicality that had to do with the entrance of the papers you needed to put in at the Television Academy had to be in by 10 a.m. in the morning of a Monday morning or something.
Right.
And that the papers never got in until 10 minutes after 10.
Ugh.
And so they disqualified it.
Ugh. That's hard to deal with. Yeah, that's something that it has stuck clearly. I can hear.
Talk about things that are hard to deal with. That's hard to deal with.
Yeah. We spoke earlier about how artists are always borrowing from each other, and all art is built upon what comes before it. Do you hear scores today where you think, "Oh, that sounds like something I might have done"?
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, many times, and I know for a fact that this particular composer had no idea, that of what I had written. It's not like, oh God, they went and stole it. It's just eventually. Hey, I'm sure there's plenty of stuff that I wrote that sounded like a whole bunch of stuff. I used to go to the Roxy Theater when I was 16 years old in New York City and listen to, Max Steiner's score or something. I'm sure there's something in mine that sounds like that. You can't get away from it. I don't know how familiar you are with classical music, but Haydn wrote, 104 or 102, 104 symphonies in his life. How much, writing 2 symphonies every year of his life from the time he was born. But you have to realize that when you listen to that stuff, you're listening some of the time to about 50 symphonies, one symphony written 50 times,
Yeah.
Yeah, because, it was just, it's impossible to do that. And some of the composers now who are just have these whole army of people writing for them because they can't possibly do the amount of music and composing that's asked, that they take them on themselves. They don't have to take it. You can't say no, but nobody says no nowadays. They just hire more people. And that, they're all writing the same thing, 50 times, scoring them 1 times. And, yeah, sure. I hear things, and and I say, "Oh, gee, I wrote that 40 years ago." Like I said, the guy probably wasn't even alive then. So
Yeah. Well,
I couldn't say anything.
One of my sorry, what I was going to say, one of my followers on Twitter, a guy called Lance Shart, he reckons that he sees a connection and an influence between your Battlestar Galactica theme and W.G. Smith's West Wing theme.
West Wing.
Yeah, West Wing was about, I guess, 15, 20 years ago now, big political show about the US presidency.
I can't think of the theme.
Yeah, I can't either. I need to have a listen, but it's interesting that people spot these things.
I do know that there were a couple of things. There was one that I actually had my lawyer preparing lawsuits. There's a guy who writes music for the National Football League, for the NFL, and he wrote something for one of the Super Bowls. And I happened to be actually listening to it, and I said, son of a bitch, that's Galactica, in disguise, but that's what it is, And so I wrote some letters and some stuff, and found out who wrote it, and found out that he's a regular composer for the NFL. And we were about to go into some kind of legal stuff, and finally, my attorney happens to be my brother, and he's a music attorney, and he said to me, you got to start realizing that, he says, this isn't going to be like 6 months from now or 3 months from now it'll be taken care of. He says, this could go on for 5 to 7 years.
Yeesh.
He says, are you ready to go through all of these different things for 5 to 7 years for what? He says, what are you going to do? You can probably get them to stop using it,
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's about it. He said, otherwise they're going to claim, well, they happen to be similar, so we'll stop using it, or we'll... So I said, okay, forget about it. And I haven't heard it since.
Probably
so
there's something, and it's probably the wise choice.
We'll write something else. But that's one, and there was another song that had to do with some kind of a hockey movie or an ice skating movie that was very, very similar. And again, if you look at the theme, it's pretty difficult. It's simply a scale, da 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 dee dum. I could probably find 500 pieces of classical music that probably had the same, progression of notes. So, composing, it's difficult, Like writing a book, you're certainly going to use a lot of words that people used before.
Yeah, true.
You can't say, well, somebody wrote hello, asked her before.
Yeah.
You know?
This is true. It was very cool to hear in the Battlestar Galactica kind of reboot, the 2004 series, that they used your theme in there.
Yeah, I was particularly really grateful to Bear at the last episode of the series. He did one of the most beautiful, beautiful arrangements of Galactica, and I said, "Boy, I tell you, I don't think I'd have ever written it, anything like that, but it's just great." No, I agree with you. The only bad taste that I have about that is the actual when the series started, and there was a kind of a thing going on between whether I might do it or somebody else might do it, and somebody else did do it, but not Bear. But he was the assistant, and then Bear got the job. And here and there through the series, Bear would say, "I'd like to take something from the original." And he wanted to use something out of the exploration where the guy talks about the planets and all that stuff. And he said, "Can I come over to your house? And can I look at the score and maybe borrow it for a bit so I do it right and do it the way I can see how you handled it and everything." So he was very, very nice about the entire situation of writing something that I had originally written. And then when he did that very, very powerful ending, I was very, very pleased with it. And actually, when I had a 2009, I had a birthday concert, and we played music from Battlestar, Buck Rogers, Name of the Game, I don't know, a few other movies of mine. And I invited Bear to do his version, a version. He hadn't written that version yet. He was still in the midst of it, to write a version of the Battlestar, my theme. Nice. And he did. He wrote a whole thing for it, which was, I didn't really love that. But as I said, I did love what he did for the show. This was not in the show. This was just something he wrote for the concert.
Right.
And
right.
Yeah, it was nice. But we were through that whole situation. We were friends and close, and he sent me every single solitary CD that he did, autographed CD. From the show, yeah.
Did you ever manage to keep any of your master tapes from recordings?
Oh, some of them, yeah. Not the ones I really wanted to, would like to have had. I've got a whole bunch of stuff that's on cassette, and all of a sudden I discovered now, recently, cassettes are back.
Yeah.
Yeah,
with a vengeance.
So I don't know. Yeah, I got a cassette transfer here. I might do something, but I don't know. You lose a little ambition after a while,
Yeah, well, you've had a hell of a career.
The competition is so immense now. There's so much of it that it's too much like hard work, and I did my hard work already.
You certainly did. And do you allow yourself some time to kind of look back at your incredible body of work that you created?
Oh, yeah, there are days every once in a while where I sit down and I just start playing a whole bunch of stuff, old cues of mine and things, and saying, wow, how did I write that piece of shit? And then other things that I say, boy, that's good, wow. Hey, I wrote it, that's a good cue, It goes both ways. I mean, I've listened to stuff and I say, God, how in God's name did I ever write that?
Yeah, that's great.
Self-critical, but when the deadlines come, you put anything goes.
Well, yeah, this is the thing. People just assume that you've always got all the time in the world to strive for perfection, but people forget there are deadlines and there are budgets and there's other work and.
Yeah, you don't have much time to worry about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Here, do you know what, Stu? I posted on Twitter today that I was going to be interviewing you tonight, and I had the
Yeah.
biggest response yet of any of my tweets that I put up. There were so many people wanting to say how much people were saying that they have listened to your themes more than any other composer, and you're in, the Galactica theme in particular is in their top 3 of all time, and you've been listening to it for 45 years, and so many people are still very enthusiastic about the work that you've done, and so from us to you, thank you very much.
Oh, Jamie, my pleasure, and I'm glad we finally got this done. It was a lot of hard work.
I'm glad
my phone out and you having your phones out and everything.
Yeah, seemed like it wasn't going to happen, but I'm so glad it did. I love talking to you. That was great.
All right, Jamie, a pleasure.
Thank you,
say
Stu.
hi to the fans.
Will do.
Okay.
Take
Tell
care.
them thank you.
Will do. Thanks. Bye-bye.
All right, bye, Jamie.
Well, I hope you enjoyed my chat there with Stu. I had such a good time talking to him. I was actually a little bit emotional afterwards. I just thought, wow, this guy has been around for 93 years and is telling me all about his amazing career. And I've got the opportunity to speak to him. Wonderful. Like, honestly, just feel so grateful sometimes when I have these conversations. As I mentioned in the intro, I went on a bit of a deep dive on the Knight Rider theme and came across several sites citing tracks that could have inspired Stu. 2 in particular stood out, and in my mind leave little doubt, really. The only doubt I have about this first track that I'm going to play you is that it's unclear who inspired who. Both this track and the theme tune came out at the same time, pretty much. This first track is by Harry Thuman. It's called Sphinx, and it's from 1982. For copyright reasons, I'm going to talk over the short clip a bit. So here we go. So as you can hear, it's got that electronica kind of sound. It sounds fantastic for 1982. Listen to this whole track, by the way. But listen to this bass line here. It's the theme tune, right? Then there's this classical track from Leo Delibes. It's called Cortège de Bacchus. I'm going to play the music. Just wait for this little intro here. Wait a few seconds. And there's no doubt, right? Amazing. Whether it was consciously taken from these tracks to build that Knight Rider theme tune, we'll never know. So there we go. Art combined and repurposed to create something great.
Knight Rider, a shadowy flight into the dangerous world of a man who does not exist.
And what's great about Stu is that he makes no bones about artists borrowing and stealing from each other. He mentioned about John Williams in there, and he's not saying anything bad about anyone. It's just we suck this stuff up, and sometimes it comes back out again, in our work. Yeah, really enjoyed that conversation. Thanks again, Stu, and I hope you enjoyed it too. Up next on the Filmumentaries podcast, I have longtime Lucasfilm production coordinator Mickey Herman. Then there's special effects supervisor Richard Vandenberg. We had a great chat. I met him on the Andor panel that I hosted for ILM at Star Wars Celebration. He agreed to come on the podcast. We had a really nice chat about his work. He's still very much in the industry now, so it was good to get his insights about how much the industry has changed since he started. He started on Legend for Ridley Scott. Then I have filmmaker and puppeteer Kevin McTurk. We've been trying to get this together for some time, so I'm looking forward to that. VFX artist Charmaine Chan, who's going to be amazing. Supervising sound editor Max Smith. I'm looking forward to that because sound is a area that I'm really interested in. I spoke to Gary Rydstrom and Mark Mangini in that first year of the podcast, so that should be cool. Plus, I've got Steven Spielberg collaborator, special effects supervisor Pablo Hellman coming up. Amazing. All of these conversations I'm yet to have apart from Mickey and Richard. And then I've got Star Wars fan and filmmaker David Whiteley. David made a great documentary about the British impact on the Star Wars films. David's a mate. We're looking forward to having a chat and just sort of geeking out over our love for movies, and particularly Star Wars, of course. Plus, my latest booking, Aggie Rogers, costume designer on Return of the Jedi, and so many other films as well. I'm going to have to do a ton of research for that. Thanks for your continued support. If you can, please consider supporting the podcast on patreon.com. That's patreon.com/Jamie Benning. There are several tiers to choose from with different perks. And for about $12 a year, you can help me make 24 episodes. And I'd say that's pretty good value. If you can't help that way, please leave a review and a rating, 5 stars preferably, on Apple Podcasts, as that's apparently one of the best ways to help get this in front of more eyes and ears. And a reminder that my new book is out, co-authored with Justin Berger. Return of the Jedi Unauthorized Timeline is now available on Amazon in your region. I'll post the links to that in the show notes too. I got my copy today, my final copy. I'd had some proofs, but I got a final copy in the post today. Honestly, it was a thrill like no other. I've never made a book before. I'm now an author. I'm now a published author. And we've sold a bunch today. Today was the release date, the 5th of June. There's been a bit of a delay because of Amazon stalling over the approval process, taking far longer than they said they would. But it's all good now. So if you go to JediTimeline.com, or if you just search for Jedi Timeline on Amazon, or my name, Jamie Benning, or Justin Berger, you'll find the book there. And I really do hope you enjoy it. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you can do so for the next episode of the Filmumentaries podcast.
Weirding Way Media.